Hi, Steve.
Hey, Jim.
Quick question for you, sir. How much do you know about ancient Egyptian history?
Well, I know a little bit, but why?
Well, you know how when pharaohs would pass on to the afterlife that they would be entombed with all of their worldly possessions?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering how many records we could fit into a casket. And welcome once again to Two Guys Talking About Records, a vinyl community podcast where you may notice a little something different because there's actually three guys talking about records today. My name is Jim, and I own a record store.
And I'm Steve, and I'm a record collector.
And we would like to welcome to the podcast Mr. Todd Gambrell, who is going to be an expert on the subject matter at hand today. Todd is an attorney who specializes in estate planning. Todd, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
It's not a subject that a lot of folks want to talk about, whether it be record collecting or just anything in general. It's usually something we kind of shove off to the backside, not wanting to think about our own mortality.
Exactly. You start doing that and you go, God, how old am I now? Wow.
Well, we're all at that age where we ought to start thinking about this. And I assume, I don't know about Steve, but we all have kids and we want to pass things on. And, some of these things we care about a lot more than other things. Those things may not be worth more than the other things, but we care about them a lot more. And sometimes it's those things that we care about a lot that aren't worth as much, maybe, that cause all the trouble for the kids.
We will get to all of this here in a little bit because, man, this is a tough subject. But just one quick caveat: Todd is also a collector, so that's the other big reason I thought it would be good to bring him in. We can all have this discussion at the level. But before we get to the hot and heavy stuff, the dreary stuff, let's talk about the fun stuff. How about that, Steve?
Absolutely.
As this is the Vinyl Community Podcast, we like to start off by talking a little bit about our recent pickups. We'll start with Steve, and then Todd, if you've got any, we'll go to you. And I've got a few fun ones here too. But Steve, what kind of goodies did you pick up this week?
Well, Jim, I did find a couple albums this week. And
just a couple.
We're going to start off with Mahal. So Mahal, and the name of the album is Glass Beams. And let me take it out of the jacket there. It's still going to be shiny. Mahal it's brand new. It's like Middle Eastern type. Think Krungbin.
Okay.
Krungbin. Kind of like that, with that kind of rhythm. But this it's fantastic. It's all instrumental, but it has such a cool psych groove going on with that Middle Eastern feel. Really good.
You're still very worldly.
Yeah. That was neat. I picked up, there's a reissue of Garbage.
Okay.
Very hard to find, Stupid Girls on there.
Yep.
It's just, what a great group from the 90s. And I kind of just suddenly thought, man, I would really like to have that. Yeah, again, used to have it on the CD. It's just fantastic. I like it better than when it came out right now. I mean, just listen to this thing a lot. Very, very nice. And the beginning of Stoner Rock, Caius.
Caius, yeah.
Yeah. What's the name from Stone Temple Pilots? Hum. Oh, man. Hold on. We got him on. Josh Hum.
Okay.
Well, whatever. He was part of this group. This is, to me, the best album, the only really one I need from then. But again, pretty trippy, pretty cool. Definitely great stoner rock happening on that. Then someone told me this just came out. One of our my people from Great Britain, he goes, "Did you know Shelby Lynn? She's reissued her stuff on vinyl, and this is her very first album, I Am Shelby Lynn." Kind of country, but she sounds like Dusty Springfield. I mean, it's such a good Dusty Springfield type voice with her, and absolutely sounds fantastic. I liked her. I had a bunch of her CDs, so this is the first I've dipped back in. This is my favorite from her. So if I needed one, This is it. And the final, Into the World of Jazz, Anthony Williams, Tony Williams, the drummer, for the 60s with Miles Davis, drummer extraordinaire. He was 18 when he put out this album, 18 years old. And, on there he has Herbie Hancock, Bobby Hutchinson's on here, Sam Rivers. Just incredible. This is the very first album, his very first solo album that he put out very early in the career, that obviously he went on to big things with Miles Davis. He really is one that pushed Miles Davis. We need to do other stuff. We need to do cooler, more modern type music, and push it.
Very cool.
Yep.
Well, Todd, as you are a guest today, do you have anything recent pickups that you'd like to kind of show off to the vinyl community and show us some of the goodies?
Yeah, Jim, I assume that you remember every purchase made by every one of your customers. So I'm surprised you're asking me.
A little bit,
but I'll show you. This is a great album. So Orgy of the Damned by Slash. It was out, I think they put it out in April of this year. And the great thing about this is you can see it's a bunch of old blues standards with a lot of help. So Iggy Pop's on a song, Chris Stapleton, the band Dorothy, Demi Lovato. This is really a great album if you're a blues fan like I am. So that's good. Now here's one I haven't listened to yet. One of my favorite bands because I'm an 80s kid. And the idea is I heard the one song, I liked it. I'm so... it's going to sound funny. I'm kind of afraid to listen to it because I think I might not like it. Like that Beatles song was terrible. So I haven't taken it out yet, but I'm going to soon. Those are my only two.
That's the brand new Cure album. And I can tell you from the store side of things, before that was released, we got a little note from both of our distributors saying, hey, they underestimated what this was going to do. And the demand far outpaced that first pressing. So they rationed them. And I think you Todd, had put in a pre-order on that. And so you were one of the ones that got it. I'm still waiting for the second round of those to show up, and hopefully they will soon. But hearing a lot of good things about that Cure album.
I have too. And Todd, I was kind of like you. I hadn't bought it yet because I was just kind of nervous about, is it really going to be as good as Disintegration or Kiss Me, Kiss Me? And I've kind of held off. And now Jim's just telling me I can't get it anyway. So, all right. There we go.
I'll let you know. I'll listen to it later and call you.
There we go. Hopefully I will get some more. They said it would be a couple of weeks, and it's been a couple of weeks, so we can see where it goes from there.
Awesome.
So I had a few pickups this week as well. And you know how I always say here at the record store that we're a judgment-free zone, right? Does that should extend to the podcast, right, Steve? I hope.
I think so.
I have here a copy of Pitbull's Greatest Hits. And this was originally released on CD only in 2007, and they just released a vinyl version of it this year. Now, before you go too far, and Steve, I know that Patty doesn't quite get into vinyl, but Kim does. So my wife wanted this album, so we got a hold of it. Really very kind of a cool looking, clear, cloudy vinyl. So this is one of the ones for her side of the collection, but I do count this as part of the overall collection. Now, personally, I've probably heard some Pitbull songs before. I wasn't home when she was listening to it, but I don't know as if I could tell you. So I'll have to give that a fair shake and see if it's something I like. But it's outside of my wheelhouse.
Please tell Kim I approve. I do like Pitbull, so she's cool.
Very good. And you said it's very, very big. He's a very big artist, but in Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah, in Puerto Rico, huge.
Wow. Okay. Other pickup, just a fairly common one. I have not had this in the collection. I'm a fan of Genesis, but oddly enough, I don't, after the prog rock talk we had a few weeks back, Steve, I don't go back too much into the Gabriel era of Genesis. I like some of the early Collins stuff. This was their 12th studio album, 1983, if I recall. Yep. 83 is when that came out. So this is kind of really, I think, a high school era type of album, and it reminds me of that. And it's got that one problematic song that you probably shouldn't listen to anymore. Won't mention that one. Thirdly, this we have to decide whether this is an upgrade or not. I picked up a copy of Styx, Grand Illusion. This one is the first press from 1977, so that is that year. And I had a really nice copy of this. Again, I'm not the biggest Styx fan, but I'll dive to that well once in a while. But I kept this one even though the cover, it's got a hole punch, it's a little more raggedy than the other one, but I kept it because it is a white label promo. So it is a lesser quality copy than the one that I had in my collection, but it is a white label promo. So would that be considered an upgrade?
For you, maybe, yes, Mr. Promo, but that is a great album.
It is. My proclivity for the white label promos got me the better of that, and I gave up the cover quality for that.
Is it Prague?
And then finally, what's that?
Is that Prague? That sticks.
I just consider that classic rock. Todd, any opinions on prog rock or not?
Well, I'm a big Rush fan, but Styx is classic rock, my friend.
There we go. It's 2-1 now, Steve.
All right.
And finally, I've got one new album in the offing today, and I had to order this one because I can't get it from my distributors. Brand new stuff from Mark Farner. If you watch our Radio Wasteland channel, you've seen that I had interviewed Mark a couple of weeks back. We talked actually a month or so ago prior to the release of his brand new album called Closer to My Home. He sent a little autographed one on here too from the website. Very good album. It is rock and roll. It's a very bright red album on there as well. It's rock. It's new songs, all of them with the exception of his closer, which is a cover, a re-recording, if you will, of I'm Your Captain, parentheses, Closer to Home on here. They're celebrating the 55th anniversary. They call it a 55th anniversary re-recording of that song. Mark's voice is really not missing a beat like a lot of older rockers tend to get to. He still has the ability to get some of those notes, which is really good on here. What's cool about this, though, is that it is, as I mentioned, it's a rock album, but it's also got some funk in there. You can see some of his old Grand Funk roots kicking through in here. And it's got some harder rock on here, too. And that is due in part to the engineer and producer, Mark Slaughter. Mark Slaughter helped him out with this album. He had maintained a friendship with Slaughter, and they worked together on this and a lot of other folks. But I think that Slaughter's improvement or his involvement in this really comes through with a few of these songs that are much harder than you would think Mark Farner would be more of his classic rock or funk style would be in here. So, and yeah, if you check out that interview, it's on our YouTube channel. I put it up a couple of weeks back. Very interesting. I talked with him for about 45 minutes. One of the takeaways from that interview also, there's a song on this new album. It's called Anymore. And if you listen to the lyrics on there, it starts off talking about how he used to be in this really popular rock band, but we don't play together anymore. And after listening to the song and reading the lyrics, it sounded like it was almost like an apology letter to the rest of Grand Funk. So I asked Mark about that, and it's not how he interpreted it. It was like, it's a memory of, yeah, I used to play in this band. And I'm sorry that we don't do it anymore, but it almost came across with his answer on that is like, I'm ready to accept their apologies. But it's a fun album, Mark Farner. And I think the only place you can get it is off of his website still. I'm trying to get some for the store because I've had some other interest in it, but we'll see what we can do there. So those are the pickups. And what I'll do is every week, those of you that watch our episodes here know that we put together a Spotify playlist to give you guys a little sample of the stuff we're listening to. If it exists in there, I'll put it on the playlist, and you can find that in the description of both this podcast episode on our Facebook page and on the YouTube description as well. And sometimes Steve gives me some challenges finding this stuff, but we'll see what we can do.
I'll try.
Okay. Well, sirs, onward to our subject at hand today. And as we talked about earlier, it's something that I think, whether it be record collectors or baseball card collectors or anybody that collects anything or anybody that has accumulated stuff over their lifetime, one of the things that they don't really seem to want to talk about and incorporate into this collection is the idea of their own mortality. The idea that someday I'm going to be gone. What happens to my stuff? What happens to my record collection? Now, this came about because, Steve, a couple of weeks back, you did a show on your channel, your Steve Carlson Vinyl Community channel, where you asked this big question. What was your response to that question you asked?
Well, there's about 200 and some responses to it, but it was a question that many struggle with. Some have good plans in place. Some have gone to a lawyer and decided, here's what we're going to do. Others have worked out deals with record stores. I like one where he goes, I worked out a deal, I bring it in, I get, kind of like on consignment, I get 60%, the record store gets 40% of the sale of that item. Others have, there's one of my friends, he found a younger collector, and he will give a lot of this because he doesn't have anybody to give it to. A lot of his, he's going to give to this younger collector because he knows that person's going to take care of it. Myself, I really trying to figure out what to do with it. Like my kids, the biggest thing about that flood is my kids thought that was the greatest blessing in the world because it got rid of an extremely large ball collection, baseball card collection. It got rid of a large stamp collection and all the records. So they go, "Ooh, we don't have to deal with this stuff now." Hey.
Now, Todd, do you find that this is, well, you deal with this on a daily basis as an attorney and as someone who specializes in estate planning, but do you feel that folks have a great deal of difficulty thinking about this ahead of time, this type of thing?
Yeah, so all I do all day long is wills and trusts, and I help people sort of figure out what to do with everything. And collections are always kind of an issue. Sometimes, like Steve said, the kids don't want the stuff, right? My kids are 19 and 15. I think they're in a generation where they really won't want any of my stuff. So yeah, this is a discussion we have on a daily basis.
But again, do you find when people do come to you, is it difficult for them to think about, or they, I guess what I'm trying to say is it tough to want to talk about letting go of things?
Well, especially people like us who are collectors, we get it, right? It is difficult for people to talk about letting go of things. It's like, you have an office, a store full of records, and you don't want to sell any of your own. You only want to sell the ones you're going to sell. I collect things and I sell on eBay, but I have a great deal of things that I never want to sell, even though I know I should. So yeah, it's very difficult for people to have a much more emotional connection to their collections than they do to, their money.
But it's also something that's tremendously important to think about, is where I'm getting at with this too. It's you may not want to deal with it ahead of time, but you probably should.
Yeah, for the benefit of your kids, for the benefit of your collection, you really do need to deal with it, right? You need to have some plan in place, but it's not just your collection, although that's what we're going to talk about today. It could be anything. It could be your small business. We need to get a business succession plan in place. It could just be your money in your real estate. This is Michigan, so your cottage, a lot of family division around the family cottage. So whatever it is, you need to have a good concrete plan in place to make sure that when you get hit by this magical beer truck we talk about, they know what they're doing. And in the case of a collection, like Steve said, maybe there's a ready market already in place. There are specific instructions that say, hey, kids, go see Jim. Here's what he's going to do. So yeah, it's a super important thing. And we can get into the mechanics in a second, but yeah, it's a crazy important deal, and a little bit more difficult with collections, say, than just a bank account.
I had a number of people, right? And this was, a lot of them just said, who cares? I'm going to be dead. Let someone else figure it out. It just doesn't matter. I'm going to enjoy it till the day I die. Then someone else. I go, really? Is that, you want to do that too? The other people around, just, there you go, figure it out. I was a little shocked how many people responded that way.
Yeah, man, I hear people say that in my office all the time, not only about collections, but about money and the real estate as well. And I kind of look back at them and I say, well, then why are you sitting here paying me $400 an hour to talk to you? Look, let's figure something out and not put that burden on your kids, because we can figure it out in a couple hours, get it written down on paper, and it saves your kids 2 years of hassle.
Well, especially too at a time when there's so much else to deal with. If it's, I don't want to start talking more about death and things, but I guess that's a big part of it.
That's what we're doing.
It can come on as suddenly as a car accident, or it could come on, you see it coming because of an illness or something like that. But regardless, it's on its way. And if a family has to deal with something suddenly, this probably would be one more less thing to worry about.
Yeah, it's already a difficult time. And imagine if you're not a record collector. You walk into Jim's basement and there's 4,000 records. What are you going to do with that? You have no idea where to start. Or you walk into my buddy Dave's and there's, 1,000 comic books. Where do you start? How do you know how to value them? Right? You can get on eBay, but it's going to take you 5 years to figure it out. So if the plan's already in place, not only are you doing best for the family by securing the most amount of money for them if we have a good plan in place, but we're taking that burden off the kids. It's a big deal.
Someone's going to walk into Goodwill and go, wow, look at all them record albums someone just dropped off. This is awesome.
Which is going to be great for me when I walk in 10 minutes later and buy them and then sell them to Jim. But that's not the best thing to happen for the family.
Yeah.
Do you find it more difficult rather, to deal with specific collections like this? Now, for example, I've got a large Rush and a large Pink Floyd collection and some fairly valuable records. Now, my kids, unlike, Steve mentioned his kids don't really want to deal with it. My kids are both adults, but I can see them from time to time already divvying up who gets which one and where it goes.
Okay,
but that's not going to be the case with all of them. And as you mentioned too, it's the dream of everybody to walk into a thrift store and find, find a $500, $600 record sitting there, and they go, ooh. Steve and I have talked about that. I think thrift stores are probably a little more careful about that these days. But B, even that is, I think, shorting the family out.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's really shorting the family out. So there's really some specific things we can do. And these are not just endemic to records or baseball cards, or, you can see all the junk behind me that I collect, but really specific to everything. I mean, number one, you need to have a good will or trust that just says what happens. And that what happens could be like in Jim's family, it could be everything goes to the kids. If he wants, Jim can write a specific list of which records go to which people. That handwritten list, the only legal requirement to it is it needs to be signed and dated. That list can be or serves as conclusive evidence of what's supposed to happen. So your personal representative or trustee has to follow that. So in Steve's case, he might have a will that says, okay, here's what we're going to do. In addition to the person who's the personal representative or the trustee, I name Jimmy Gleason as my personal representative as to my collections. And that gives Jimmy Gleason legal authority to go gather up the collection, be in charge of the process. So you can name your wife to pass out all the money, but Jimmy to pass out the records. And so you can put right in your will or trust, I name Jimmy to be in charge of the records. He's going to gather them up. He's going to catalog them just like he does for his store, and then try and sell them. And maybe you already have a deal with Jimmy, like you said. We can put that right in the document. We can create a separate document. And we do that quite often for, the $2-3 million collections. We're going to have a very specific provision about it that says, hey, Jim Gleason is going to collect up my records. He's going to sell them. And then we have a separate agreement. We might call it a buy-sell agreement. We might call it a trust amendment, whatever, that lays out the rules for how that's going to work. He has 90 days. He has 180 days. He's got a year. Could be a 60-40 split. Could just be whatever. We trust Jim a lot. So it's whatever he gets, he's going to give us some money after his overhead.
And I think you hit on a good point there. If you do something like that, it does have to be somebody that you would trust to be able to do that. Now, Steve and I have known each other for a while. Steve, if you do this, we'll talk about the Zamrock later. But no, I think that gets to the larger point of it has to be somebody that you and your family down the line would be able to trust to do this for correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody you name as your personal representative under a will or a successor trustee under a trust needs to be somebody you trust completely. And if you don't have somebody you trust completely, we name a corporate trustee like a bank. Now, the problem with naming a corporate trustee to deal with a record collection is, who knows how they're going to establish the value. And if we name a corporate trustee to deal with a record collection or a baseball card collection, the value could just get eaten up in fees and legal fees, to be honest with you. So in my trust, for example, Oddly enough, I have the sheriff of Midland County named as the person who will value my collections and then be in charge of selling them. And he's a close friend. So in that world, he's agreed to do it for free. So if you can find somebody who'll do it for free, even better.
Yeah.
Now, the downside is he has unlimited time to do it. And we argue over stuff we buy together all the time. So half of it may just end up in his collection, never accounted for. We don't know. But that's the idea, is pick somebody you completely trust, because the issue is valuation. Now, let's say you don't, you just want to pick your son, your daughter, your wife, whatever, your husband to be the trustee, and they don't know anything. Well, you just have to help them then. What you want to do, and I know this takes some of the fun out of collecting because I'm not great at it, admittedly, but I'm getting better. You want to catalog your collection. You want to catalog your collection, whatever it is. You can do it on spreadsheets. If you're an engineer, you can write it on pieces of paper and stuff it in one book, but try to catalog your collection somehow. Okay. So let's talk about records for a second. My collection is cataloged in Discogs. And so I make sure, here's another good point. Make sure your kids have full access to all your passwords when you die. All right. Leave your password book in your binder with your trust. So my kids can get onto Discogs and they can see my entire collection. And I've done a pretty good job with my records, because Jimmy showed me how to use the program of, putting the right version in. Right now, I'm sure they're not all correct. And that kind of leads to some trouble with the kids thinking, oh, this is a $900 album. And they have to go to Jimmy, and Jimmy's like, no, your dad wasn't great at this stuff. This is actually a $40 album, but the more you catalog your collection, the better it's going to be. And so if you don't have Discogs that tells you what the value is, if you collect baseball cards and you're just handwriting or keeping a spreadsheet, put some value in. Yeah. And if it's not a slabbed coin or a slabbed card or a slabbed comic book, put what you think the grade is. Now, again, that sometimes runs into trouble, but put at least a starting point for your kids to find, so they have some kind of idea and they can go talk to the coin dealer or the comic dealer with your list, the collection, and start to make a plan. Make sense?
Yeah, my youngest son already asked me, Dad, why don't you give me your Discogs password so I'm ready to go with this thing. But to your point, it is. And I kind of think about, again, I mentioned with the record store, and I guess to me, my biggest issue when it comes to that is, first off, when I die, will that record store still be around? Will that person be retired? For instance, if I work something with Jim and I drop off at age 90, I don't know, Jim, at 80, if you're still running a record store. We'll see. So kind of with, what your point there, even with, a family member, it becomes something that at least they're going to be there, instead of having, I got to change my will again. My record store, he just he left. And
right. Well, that's why we might have a separate agreement. If you make a business succession plan with Jim, the idea might be we're going to have a separate agreement from your trust, and the trust might say, hey, reference this agreement dated whatever date between Jim and Steve, and then we can change that agreement. So if Jim gets hit by the beer truck, oh boy, we don't have to change your trust, but we are going to take a look at that separate agreement and then say, okay, well, Jim's son took over the record store, so now the agreement's with him. You could put backup plans in place. It could be with Jim, and if Jim's not around, it's with the guy at RPM up in Traverse City or some other collector that right? So you can have lots of contingencies in all the documents. But it's a great point, Steve. And the point is, you got to look at your documents, your will, your trust, your powers of attorney. You need to take a look every couple of years, especially if we're doing something specific like dealing with a record collection. You have to take a look at your documents, review them every couple of years, make sure it all still makes sense to you, and make sure the facts are still correct. Is Jim still in the record business? Did he, decide to go off and sell hot dogs instead? Is Todd still a record collector? Are these people you named still around? So it's a big it's a big deal to make sure your documents are updated as time goes on. Okay.
I think that that's one of the good things about Discogs as well. And Steve and I have talked about this. I think just the past couple of weeks we talked about Discogs, is that that's going to give whoever has access to it after the fact kind of a running update because of the way Discogs works. It's constantly saying this album is worth this, where next week, 2 weeks, a year from now, it could be worth a lot more for whatever reason. So that's kind of a sliding thing where a notepad is a notepad. And if I bought this, and I think it's worth $100, and down the line, for whatever reason, let's say that that Mick Jagger gets a sainthood, the Catholic Church bestows that, and then that goes up in value. All your Rolling Stone stuff goes up, especially Satanic's Majesty. That changes a lot. That's a weird example. Sorry.
Yeah, right. For sainthood, especially.
Yeah.
It's like,
now, Todd, what about? And I only bring this up because this happened to up north. I spent a lot of time in the Upper Peninsula. My mother lives up there. A friend, an acquaintance of hers, had a fairly large record collection. And when they passed away, they had willed this collection to an arts center to do with as they want, whether they want to show it, display it, or sell it or otherwise. They had to make this decision. Okay, I saw some of the pictures. I'm like, wow, man, there's some good stuff there. But it had been willed to an entity itself.
Yeah, you can do that through your will and trust. I don't think about that with records as much as we might with some of the, Midland's a weird little place with some very wealthy families with some, art and things like that. Usually, if we're going to transfer something to a charity, it's so the charity can sell it, take the money, and use that money for their general purposes or whatever specific purpose the testator had. But you could always leave something to a charity. Now, the weird thing about leaving records, I would think, is, what are they going to do? That's a hard project for the charity to sell. Yeah. If they want to turn it into art, then it's like Jim said, you're like, oh my gosh. I mean, now you're taking that $900 record and, doing whatever you're doing with it. So I would counsel clients to, put some specific guidelines if they were going to do that too. You need to sell it and use the money for your general purposes or some specific purpose, unless it was something like, we've done in the past. You've got a Remington, let's say. Well, you're going to let United Way auction off the Remington, garner the proceeds. It's a big deal, a lot of buzz around it, and have a lot of money. But I wouldn't put United Way in charge of selling my record collection. That's for sure. That's not going to work out well.
Definitely an odd thing to think about. What about Todd? Is there a lot of cost that goes into the effort, or is it something that can be done very easily to put together this kind of contingency plan for your collections?
So it depends. It's not usually crazy expensive. If the main thing you have is your house, your car, and a record collection, that is not going to be very expensive. You can spend $500-600 with a lawyer to get simple will and powers of attorney drafted. You can do it on your own online, but I counsel against that because it's most likely going to be incorrect. Okay. Most of the time, most of the documents I see that come in and people say, hey, I did it online, they're just not right. And it ends up costing a little bit more to correct it. Now, with personal property, which records are, the law in Michigan and really everywhere actually allows somebody to leave a handwritten list. This is called a holographic will. If you don't have any other documents, you could actually leave a handwritten list that the law allows for. So you would write out, if you wanted to make this to have some kind of plan, but as cheap and easy as possible. Although I tell people, hey, man, don't choose your lawyer, your financial planner, or your doctor on cost, right? I mean, those are probably the things you don't want to skimp on. But at any rate, you could handwrite out my entire record collection to Jim. You sign it, you date it. Those are the two things to make it official. That's a holographic will right there. It's better than having nothing.
Yeah.
Not great, but you could do that.
Now, could that in the age of Discogs, could that just as easily be a file, an export file from Discogs, a database?
No, because the law is still 200 years behind. So no. You would have to have a separate written agreement. So we could go back to the file in Discogs for the list of records, but we would have to have a one-page, dealio that says, I leave all my records to Jim. Signed Jimmy Gleason and dated. That's the official thing that the court will say. That is a holographic will. And then, whoever, so if he's leaving records to you, I mean, Jim, you could use his list, but really what that does is give you legal authority to go to his house and take the records.
Wow.
So that's as simple as the will could be, all the way up to an incredibly complex trust. So most people in today's world that we're going to run across use a trust instead of just a will. The trust avoids the probate court process. And all that does is help whoever you're leaving behind not have to deal with the county probate court to transfer these records. So if we have a trust and the trust says, I leave all my records to Jim, whoever the successor trustee is has legal authority to just hand those records to Jim without getting permission from the court. If we have a will, just a will, before whoever the personal representative or executor in the will can actually hand the records to Jim, we have to get permission from the court.
No kidding. Huh.
Yeah. And getting permission from the court isn't always the easiest thing. I mean, here in Midland County, we're blessed with some great judges who understand how the world works, and our incoming probate judge, Angela Cole, does a great job. So, it's still a process. Probate in general, if everybody gets along, usually takes a year and a half. And even in a small county like Midland County is going to cost 10 or 15 grand in legal, CPA, appraisal, and court fees. So most of the time we use a trust just to avoid that process altogether. And so we have all our language about who we're leaving the records to, or the lighters, or whatever it is, in that trust. And that way, the successor trustee, or the person who's in charge of the trust, does not have to get any approval from the court to do the work, whether it's sell the house or pass the records over. It's really a big deal. And if we're the kind of people that can afford, like Steve, it looks like maybe you have a couple thousand records back there. You're probably the kind of person that can afford to have a trust done and make it a lot easier on your kids to, skip that government process altogether.
Oh, but we love red tape. What's more fun than red tape? Hey, Dad died. Now look to the mess. That's interesting. I was totally unaware of that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, the trust avoids the probate court process, and this is not a state-by-state deal. This is every state in the country has essentially the same probate laws.
All right, so Jim, let's put some probate people out of business.
There we go.
Well, no, you don't want to do that because we're all the same people.
Okay.
I prefer to help the family and charge the family in a way that makes a lot more sense.
There we go.
By using a trust and kicking me out of the process at the end run than going through probate. I don't like doing probate as a lawyer either, because it's a serious hassle. And although the rules are the same in every state, I'll tell you what, every single probate court, and of course, so there's one in every county, I've practiced before every single one of them, they all have their own rules. Probate is one of these ancient processes that is run by little fiefdoms. So if we don't have to do it, what might happen in Gogebic County might be totally different than Midland County, although it's not supposed to. We have one set of laws, but what happens in Gogebic might be totally different than Midland. So, it's a nightmare all the way around most of the time.
So basically you're saying then that it would really be beneficial for folks to plan this out ahead of time so that they don't have to deal with that end of things with the probate and the mess that comes. If you're planning ahead of time, you can make that easier.
Absolutely. If you're planning ahead of time, which you should, and you should be planning not only for your cottage and your IRA and your bank accounts, but you should be planning for your collections, your, whatever it is, your records, your baseball cards. I'm going to tell anybody that has a significant collection that they should use a trust, or we use a will and trust together, as opposed to just a will, for the purpose of making it 100 times easier on the kids because the trust avoids the probate court process. So that's the end of the discussion. The beginning is, all right, who are you leaving it to? How are we going to do it? Here's some mechanisms. The end is, we're going to do this by writing it all down in a trust and perhaps a side agreement to the trust specific to the collection.
So does a trust take a lot more to set up than a will? It sounds like there's a lot more, it's more complicated, or it takes longer to set up.
No, that's a great question, Steve. And the answer is no.
Oh.
It takes the exact same amount of effort to set up as a will. There are some things we have to do with the trust that we don't have to do with the will. There's a process of renaming some assets, title on the assets, but it is not a complicated animal. It is so common in today's world that, if you looked on a GIS at how people own their houses, it's all in the name of their trust. So a trust is an incredibly easy and more common now than just a will process, mainly for the purpose of avoiding the probate court at death, obviously.
Yeah. Have you dealt with people? So let's say someone passes, there is a large collection, no one's done a thing with it. Have you ever had to mess with any of that kind of stuff? And what kind of, is it real messy?
Yeah, the answer is yeah, several times, quite a few times. And it is messy because, all of the things we've already talked about. One kid thinks that the Mickey Mantle baseball is the only one and, or the one, and it's worth $1 million. And we find out it's fake. Another kid thinks this comic book is worth $1,000 and we take it to the guy down the road and it's worth $1. That's what causes family fights. The fact that the collector isn't helping these kids figure out what they're worth, what to do with it, causes family issues, because one kid that thinks it's $1 million baseball thinks the other kid's just trying to screw him. That happens on a regular basis.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
Not having a plan not only makes it difficult on the kids just in terms of knowing what everything it is, but it also tends to cause family drama, right? Because some people, they've never been around collections. They don't understand how collections and how pricing works and how value works. One day it's worth this, the next day it's worth, 100 minus that. They don't understand what's going on. They take it out on their siblings thinking that something nefarious is going on because the actual expert said it's worth $1, but dad said it was worth $1 million. You know how many times I hear, my dad always told me that Corvette was worth $200,000. And I have to look at people and I say, look, here's the deal. We can tell he bought it for $20,000 and he put $180,000 worth of parts into it. It's worth $50,000. What do you want to do? It's that kind of thing. So all of these reasons are reasons why you should have a trust.
Yeah.
You should have a concrete plan in your trust that specifically indicates what is going to happen with these collections. And even if it's just, hey, I give all these collections to Jim, that at least solves the problem.
Yeah.
Right. It's better if we can have a little more information around the collection, a little catalog of your records, maybe some ideas as to value. And then even if we could, like we talked about earlier, a reference to an expert. So maybe, you have an old expert in there like Jim, and then a young expert like Jim's son. You could name them in the documents to make it a lot easier on the kids so that they're not spending a ton of money in court, so they're not fighting with each other, and we're not causing a lot of extra drama in an already difficult time.
Yeah. Well, Todd, and this is fantastic. My concern is, I've put thousands of dollars into this collection, and the last thing you want it to, happen is just someone comes in, I'll give you, $500 for the whole thing. Okay, and someone does that, and it basically your family screwed out a bunch of money. I will never get what it's worth. I get that, discounts, I understand that, but you can sure get almost nothing if you don't do it right.
Yeah, that's 100% true, man. I mean, there's a big difference between not getting what you have into it and getting $500 for it. Right now, I'd love to walk into your place after you get hit by the beer truck and pay $500 for your collection. I'll be happy to do that, and I'll sell them. We'll all make money, but no, you're 100% correct, man. That's what the plan helps you with.
I have had experience with this on the buying end several times. And Steve, a lot of the bigger collections over the years that have come in, the punk collection being one of them, the psych rock collection being another one, came from families after there had been a passing. The collector had passed, and these families came to me. Now, again, you know me, I'm trying to be as fair as I can with them, but at the same time, on the business side, I got to pay rent, I got to pay lights, I got to, make my bills on that same as well. But so you find that balance. But yeah, the site collection in particular, I had to drive all the way over to the Thumb to get that and make a couple of trips because that worked out to be about 6,000 or 7,000 records. And the woman that had them, her husband had passed away a year previous, and it was from a prolonged illness. And so he had lots of time to talk with her, make sure you do this, make sure you do this. This is worth this. And that actually helped me on my side because she had a little bit better of an understanding. But at the same time, I think that she had been cultivated by her late husband saying, you're not going to get this, but this is a reasonable where you should go. And the other example was our good friend Bill, when he had passed. You'd mentioned this as well with his wife. And I worked with her to make sure that a good portion of that collection got the value that it deserved going out, which is probably a little bit easier for that to be dealt with through a store. But again, I think Bill trusted me, and I knew Bill and Bridget a long time. That was something that was a little easier. It was tough losing Bill, mind you, but at the same time, I felt good that this was being done correctly.
Yeah, that's the whole reason for the plan, though, is to say, look, I trust Jim. Jim's going to do what is right. And even though, I spent this much money, we're not going to get that much money. Although I tell you what, the other reason it's important is, my favorite joke is I'm afraid that when I die, my wife's going to sell my guitars for what I told her I paid for them. So there's kind of another reason to have somebody in there to help out. But it is a good point. And by and large, most people that have been in business a long time are honest people. If you've been in business a long time, you're an honest guy most of the time, okay? So most of these record dealers that you get to know are going to be people that are honest people and just be straight up and say, look, I am providing you a ready market for all of these records. You could part them out one at a time, saying to the kids, you could part them out one at a time and maybe get a little more money, but think of the amount of time you're going to have to do that, and you're not a record dealer. Whereas Jim provides, or whoever the record dealer is, a ready market for everything and immediate cash. So that is a very valuable service in this industry, because then we have the money right away to divide up with the kids and the project is done. I mean, imagine coming into Steve's house and your son says, okay, I'm going to put every single one of these up on eBay or Discogs. I mean, that's a project. This kid's going to be a full-time record collector and or record seller, and he probably doesn't have time for that. So, I mean, that's why, making a relationship with your record dealer is a pretty good idea.
Very good.
We're halfway there, Steve, right?
Yeah. That's right.
It is seriously, I think, one of those subjects, as we said at the top of this, that folks really don't want to talk about. They don't want to deal with, because that means accepting the fact that there is a finality to this collecting at some point. At some point, we have to stop collecting, because that stops everything for us. So what happens is of paramount importance to figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Well, Steve, do you have anything else for Todd?
No, this has been, I think it's been very enlightening. I mean, it's brought up a lot of stuff for me that actually, that I want to do, that I want to look at, especially the whole trust thing. But it was just amazing the amount of people that really do not know what to do with a collection like this. Many have no one to give it to, and they go, so now what? And, again, very helpful.
I think there's one final distinction to make too, because as we've talked about lots of times before, there are different levels of collecting.
Yeah.
I think those of us, and Todd, looking at some of the stuff behind you, are different than the people that have a couple hundred records in a crate. And I see a lot of those. I see a lot of those as weeks go by. People bring in, oh, I've got a huge record collection. Well, how much do you got? Oh, about 50. Okay, well, it's relatively speaking, that's a good collection, but it's not at a level where I think you'd really need to worry. That's not to say that you shouldn't worry about 1 to 200 records versus 3 to 4,000, but you'd still want that plan.
Or even, Jim, if it's like 1,000 records, but they're common, they haven't been put in sleeves, they're kind of beat up. I got all these records, but not like that's highly collectible. That is of extremely valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot, like Steve said, a lot of it's value. I mean, numbers are one thing, but it's value. So we can look at Steve and go, okay, this guy's taking care of this stuff and the kind of records that he showed us at the beginning. This guy has a valuable collection. So you can figure that out. And it really is, it's value. If you have 100 records, unless they're all Mophie Labs originals or something, probably don't have that kind of value. But even so, we want to be as specific as possible in any estate plan we create. And if the kids think they're valuable, even though they're not, we're still going to run into trouble. So I always say, look, whether you got, 20 records or 20 baseball cards or 20,000, let's address them. If the kids know they're there and they think it's an issue, let's address it somehow. But excellent points.
Very, very good advice, Todd. Thank you so much for doing that. I do have one final thing to share, and it's just occurred to me. I had a call yesterday where somebody had bought a house and they discovered a secret room in the house that had records.
Really?
And I'm waiting for a call back once they decide what's going on with them. But
nice.
Talk about
room. Now,
collection. I'm
it's
not going to tell my wife. I'll put it in the secret room.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, that person probably did not have a plan. If they forgot or the house passed along and the new people moving in, what is this? It's a secret room full of records.
Didn't have a plan and probably didn't have a dehumidifier in that room either. So I don't know what we're going to be looking at.
Well, I'll update you when I hear more on this. I said, call me after the holidays. We'll talk and see what's going on.
Good deal.
Todd, thank you very, very much for joining us on the podcast today. It's very insightful. And as much as we don't want to think about that end of collecting being the end of collecting, it is something we got to address it at some point in our lives with our families, with our children, with those around us. It's just something that is unavoidable. Death, taxes, and what am I going to do with my collection?
Yeah, there you go. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. You guys are doing a great job. And I'll expect my free record next week, Jim, when I'm in the store. Okay.
You got it. Well, I've got some Herb Albert back there for you.
Ask for a minor threat.
There.
Right. Right. I want one behind you.
So again, we've been talking with Todd Gambrell. He's an attorney who specializes in estate planning, and I think that really came through today. That the planning part of the estate is probably one of the more important things we can do. So again, Todd, thanks so much for being here. Steve, as always, great talking with you.
Yeah, great talking to you, Todd. Thank you again. Yeah, great points. Definitely, this has been enlightening, and I hope the viewers watching this got as much as I did out of it.
Sounds good. All right, we will talk to you folks next week. Thanks again for being here on Two Guys Talking About Records. Until next time, I'm Jim. I own a record store.
And I'm Steve, and I own too many records.
And Todd, you collect too.
Have a great day.
All right, thanks everybody.